So we'll get started then. My name is Ross Kaler. I'm the transportation engineer for the city of Fitchburg and the city's project manager for the Lacy Road and Seminole Highway reconstruction project. Also got Lieutenant Ned Hartwick here, if you want to introduce yourself.
Lieutenant Ned Hartwick with the Fitchburg Police Department. I work closely with Ross on traffic and transportation issues in the city.
Mm-hmm. And then we've also got some officials from the city here, if you guys want to introduce yourselves.
I'm Jim Wheeler. I'm the District Court Holder, which of course includes all of this area body here.
Bill Jetzer, I'm a District 2 Alder.
And I'm Chad Breckman, the City Administrator.
So basically, me and Ned kind of want to do with this meeting is go over this project in general from the construction side and move into just kind of explaining what we've got for assigned detour and road closure signs. And then kind of open it up to questions and your concerns as residents of this neighborhood or the surrounding neighborhoods. So basically where we're at with this construction, as you all probably know, it started a month or so ago, 6 weeks at this point probably. And it started with the closure of mainline Lacy Road between Seminole Highway and Fitch-Rona. We restricted the closure of the Seminole Highway and Lacy intersection until school was out. So now that school is out, they've started tearing that intersection up to put in a roundabout. And that construction is going to be done by August 31st. That's when, right before school comes back in the fall. So those are kind of our big milestones there. So far, we are on track to reopen that intersection by that date. And then mainline Lacy Road is also on track to be reopened by the deadline of October 31st, sorry. Yeah, so that's kind of the main story there. I don't know if any of you were out of internet today, but that was also because of this project. So we're running into some utility snafus for private utilities, but our crews on site are working through that, and they haven't delayed us too bad so far. So kind of moving into the detour and kind of our reasoning behind it. As you can see on this map, the detour is the yellow dashed line. The actual project boundaries are in solid red. So this detour is a little bit longer than a lot of other detours you'll see. That's mainly because Lacy Road and Seminole Highway are both arterial streets. And because of that, they carry a lot of traffic through the city east, west, and north, south, as I'm sure you guys all know. The closest equivalent streets that we have in the city are, as you can see, about a mile to the north, McKee, 1.5 miles to the east, Fish Hatchery, and then about a mile and a half to the south, Wayland Road. Wayland Road is more of a rural road than any of those other roads are, but it's still a major east-west road through the city. So our reasoning for doing that, we just didn't want to put all this traffic going through Stoner Prairie or, say, Osmondson and Schumann as a official part of this project. Another thing with that is we also can't really close down Lacy or Seminole Highway between Wayland, Fish Hatchery, and McKee and the actual project intersection because, as you can see, there are just hundreds of single-family homes and businesses in this area of town. So that's kind of our reasoning behind having the detour the way it is. Also, as you can see up here, I've got all our signs, detour signs, LED signboards, and road closure barricades labeled. That's what we have in place right now. And I guess with that, Ned, is there anything you want to kind of add?
Sure. So I will add to this that prior to the intersection closure going into effect at Seminole and Lacy, Ross and I had connected to coordinate some additional signage and police presence in a couple of different areas, anticipating traffic coming through this neighborhood, additional traffic on Seminole Highway to include Schumann and Osmondson. And as part of that, we have 4 mobile speed display signs, 2 of which we got mounted in this neighborhood here, and a couple in the similar areas there. Unfortunately, this is a busy time of year for the police department, and on the same day as that closure beginning, we also were managing a shooting incident on the north side of the city. So our resources, already thin resources, were stretched even thinner to get extra personnel up there. That week we continued our presence there. We posted several overtime shifts to have officers in the area, mainly watching for people cutting through that closed intersection, and then also monitoring for speed coming through the neighborhood. Our resources are stretched to the point that I and our other lieutenant were out there that morning watching vehicles come through that intersection and looking for speeders coming through the neighborhood. And actually my first contact of the day was a resident of the neighborhood coming through the road closed signs through the intersection there. So we tried to be present there just to remind folks that the speed limit is 25 miles an hour coming through the neighborhood, and that we were monitoring that intersection. Now, that intersection is in such a condition that I think most reasonable people aren't going to be cutting through that closed intersection. I understand that that's not the primary driver of the neighborhood's concern, and the concern is the amount of traffic coming through that neighborhood on a frequent basis and at all hours of the day. Our economic development director had reached out to several of the large employers. We have a couple of our largest employers that sit just to the west of Seminole Highway here, to help spread that message, that the official detour is McKee Road and Whalen Road, as Ross indicated. And we will continue to revisit that messaging with them. But they're obviously dealing with hundreds of other individuals that are coming to their businesses, not to mention all of the other smaller businesses that run up the corridor to the north of them. So that provides some perspective from our response. I will address a couple of questions that have come up through social media, through phone calls, and other contacts. So folks look at the sign that says road closed, local traffic only, okay? So there's an assumption there that means that we can enforce that very easily. That's not really the case, because local traffic pertains to the work zone, and the work zone is the area in red. So all other roads in that area are open. They're public roads. We can't keep people from traveling on those roads. So really our presence and our response to this is to really remind folks that they're driving through a neighborhood and that there is a speed limit there, but we can't control the volume. We also can't force people to go onto the official detour route. Layered into that, we at best, we have 6 police officers working in the entire city. And most days, due to our staffing issues, we have 4 officers cover the entire city. So while I recognize the impact based on the videos that I've seen, based on my time that I've seen coming through here and the amount of traffic, that it's an alarming change in your neighborhood's activities, those are our limitations in addressing those. The speed display signs that we did install do capture volume and speed data. And so I can tell you, just from looking at the volume data, that it was impressive, the amount of traffic that was coming through there, especially on the first day. I mean, it was very impressive. However, by the second day, that traffic was decreasing a little bit. I think obviously any first day of a closure, you're going to see people panicking, not knowing what to do, not knowing where to go. And despite any attempts to get messaging out, I think sometimes people, with the amount of information that's available to them, I mean, you can find out just about anything anywhere. People stay focused on what they know, and so they're not necessarily seeking out this information on the closure. So the speed data, the one positive is that we are not seeing a tremendous amount of speeding from the traffic that's coming through there, and some of that is in fact limited by the volume that's coming through there. But I can share from the data in there that those signs that display speeds are not capturing a lot of speeders. So that is at least one positive that's out there as it relates to the change in the neighborhood. Did I miss anything on the?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Another, I guess, change that we've made in our signage throughout this project is some of the local businesses were concerned with decreases in their customer base right after we made this closure. So we've added signage saying road open to local businesses. So that's really the only other thing I could think of to add.
Yeah, so ultimately, as Ross indicated, we're dealing with a rather large area that's impacted with this detour. So you talk about a neighborhood that's impacted, the intersection that's impacted, and then that detour is impacting a rather large area and getting people to change their habits and patterns, as we all are creatures of habit, and getting them to stay away from neighborhoods and use the main roads. So that's the intent. If anyone can figure out how to get people to slow down and follow the speed limit no matter where they drive in the city and follow the rest of the signs no matter where they drive in the city, I'd be willing to take your advice and into account here and hopefully figure that out. But it's a challenge that traffic safety professionals and engineers are up against all the time, along with us who are out there trying our best to enforce the laws and the signage that's out there. So.
Yeah.
That I think covers the main topics that we wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I think so. So I guess with that, we'll open it up to questions, comments, concerns.
Yeah. My name's Devin, and I live on Leo Mary. First off, thank you very much. I did notice all the signage, all the prep work. I noticed the officers. Officer Gonzalez was very informative, kind of one of the first days out there. Is there any way to block off the entrance to the neighborhoods? So I guess there's a couple different points. The first one where you're allowing, I guess, the neighborhood down here. So if you go just above, behind us, I guess it's, I don't know that road, Evo maybe, right there. Can you block that off and then basically make it a choke point on either Leo Mary or Astor for tracking it down? My concern is I have seen traffic slow down, but the speed sign on Leo Mary is no longer there. So a lot of people don't know. And yesterday, or 2 days ago, I was walking my dog at 6 a.m. and in a matter of 15 minutes, I saw 3 semis get caught up in there. Not to mention, at one of them that was turning around right where your cursor is, because it went in, it did a 17-point turn to go back out the way it came, and 5 cars were going around the semi as it was doing that instead of waiting. So part of my question, and I know that I'm trying not to hinder the neighborhood, but bringing up that closure to where Hop House would be, I'll kind of allows more of a business artery for a turnaround, and then a choke point at Astor Drive or Leo Mary to make it more efficient for any officer presence. And then at the second point, down at Wayfair, blocking the inlet off or blocking it at the school. So local traffic could be informed to go around the sign. But you have a sign where it has Lacy Road on your screen, basically the old firehouse. There's a road that goes down to Wayland. There is a sign just after that that you don't have marked here on the screen. but
Yes, you're right.
bringing that out and blocking the road for the inlet to force people down that road. Those are kind of three of the things that I've seen. I definitely understand it's a temporary problem, but my house is also the one that has kids out in the front yard playing around that are 4 to 6 years old. So we have anywhere from 2 to 10 out in our front yard almost nightly. Now with the smoke, it's different, but so I mean, at this point, we've had water balloons and hot things, and I'm half tempted to start throwing water balloons and speeding cars. Because I've been able to judge enough. I know what's over 35 miles an hour, and I definitely know what 50 miles an hour is, which I can both hear, and I know 3 cars specifically that do that daily. So that's more my concern, is just on the temporary aspect.
And I think that's where the speed, I'm Kristen, I also live on Leah Mary, right down the street. And it's right where the intersection is from the Seminole Highway, like by the high crossing, like as you're going down to Wayland. So that area, I think gets a lot more traffic now than the Wayland does, I think, the Wayfair one, I think.
Like they're going from Lacy, they're going on Wayfair, and then they're turning and realizing they can go down Leo Mary and then go down Minong. So they're bypassing any of the speed signs that may actually be in the neighborhood because there's nothing, and you can just see like they weave through the neighborhood. Through there, they don't stop because there's no stop signs at a 3-way intersection, and they're just
Plowing through.
yeah.
Yep.
And they'll go in a line of like 7 in a row, and none of them live, like you can follow them all the way through the neighborhood, and they don't,
None of them live there.
none of them live there.
And it tops up. 90 minutes ago, I almost saw a pretty bad accident 2 doors down because one of our neighbors was turning in and 5 cars were coming down speeding, and one of them didn't realize that the car was turning, and that's why it was slowing down. So you just heard squeals of tires stop.
I think if there could be a way to like make it more, not that you're blocking off the road necessarily, but to remind people that this is for local traffic, like this isn't a detour, this is a neighborhood, because our streets are so wide, like we can park on either side of the street and still have a decent traffic flow through. And so when there's no street, no cars parked on the road, like someone had been parking out by our neighborhood, and that was slowing them down because they couldn't take a right turn as fast because there was a car there. And so they
Limiting
were
space.
like having to decide one way or the other and not go so fast around, like from Minong to Leo Mary, because that is like the new belt line through, is they're just weaving through.
Right. I think we could definitely look at moving or adding through traffic only or local, or no through traffic or local traffic only signs in the roadway closer to the closure. Like you're saying, before the entrances to
I'd be happy to go do a
subdivision. What's that?
My kids go to bed at 9, so I can easily go out and I'll go drag those signs right out in the middle of the road.
Yeah, we'll add more signs instead of moving the existing ones, but yeah.
But talking with the neighborhood, I do think there's plenty of people that have seen what happened day 1, day 2, and been very appreciative of what changes were made very quickly. So I think we're trying to tweak a process that you guys have definitely put time and energy into, so I don't want that to be lost. I think it's just, there's some boneheads out there that we just unfortunately get to see daily. And I'm trying to figure out the best way to both, I would love to see Hop House actually have some increased traffic. So if you could turn people around right at Hop House that are trying to go through, things like that. And Pro Mega and Sub-Zero there, so be it. But I think my biggest concerns are how can we prevent someone hitting 50 on Leo Mary, and how can we prevent semis from going down there that aren't supposed to be, that are coming out of Pro Mega and Sub-Zero.
Right.
Can you just clarify where that semi, what route that semi took?
The corner of, yeah. give me a second, I'll just look it up. It's right that corner. So it's
Okay.
Leo, Mary, and
Mine
so there's one that came down that Astor Drive, down Leo, Mary, and out. And then the one that hit the 3-point, it was Manong Lane
Yeah.
and Leo, Mary.
Okay. And we'll,
So if we move that up.
yeah, and I think if we add something on, Lacy and Seminole Highway, that local traffic would have to actually drive through barricades, that would, it wouldn't stop the issue, but it would cut it down.
Like it has to be closed, like something to make it more difficult rather than it's a completely open road and we're just gonna keep going through.
Bill, I will get to you right next, but I think over here we had one.
Yeah, so I actually live on Minong Lane, and currently right now my kids have to cross to go to Leo Mary to get on the bus for summer school every morning. And that is like high peak traffic of morning commute, and it's really difficult for them to cross that road that doesn't have any stop sign or any type of thing on crescent crossing. And our park is hopefully going to be finished soon, and so a lot of kids are going to be out there playing, and I worry about the traffic that speeds through there.
Do you think the neighborhood would care if they made it, if they blocked off the inlet from Lacy Road and forced you to go through Astor Drive
So like,
for 3 months?
I don't think so. I mean, if you look, what's on that screen right now is pretty much what the neighborhood is built. So I don't think they would mind if we blocked it off. I mean, I wouldn't. I'm just wondering, would that increase traffic for you guys? If,
It would, but I feel like that would be easier than 3 cops sitting out trying to have the highest places. And if you sit somebody at Leo Mary and Belt Drive,
We can have the presence there. The key, I think, is getting, so one of the speed display signs that we put out there is out of service. It's being sent in. We have to get it back out there. The other thing I forgot to mention too is that I know Streets was working on getting additional speed limit signs installed. There are a couple, one had
Yes.
been, and I don't know if those have gone back up or not. And I know that's not the end all be all, but I am cautious in saying that more patrol officers are going to be a part of the solution longer term here. So I think what you're getting at is that if one is available, it would be easier to have it channeled in that area.
I'd rather have a single choke point that you can either have a video camera or put your resources there than have it at multiple different spots. Because the first week, I think I saw 3 that were kind of there at varying degrees and trying to show a presence, which we appreciate. But I understand from your resources, you don't have that. So that's the only reason if you took those double lines on Lacy and moved them up to just in front of Hop House, that kind of forces or cuts out one of the pieces of traffic. I don't like the extra volume that's there, but if we can figure out some way to slow it down there, honestly, it's probably going to be, Astor Drive's not worth it. It's going to be on Lacy Drive, or sorry, Leo Mary. It's going to be the best place for any enforcement, just due to the length.
The high volume.
Yeah, that would be the highest volume, and then I think dragging out the signs where, like, if you could drive around.
Yep, have them staggered, like if it's a mainline closure that there are actually houses on. We set signs up like that all the time. So I think that would cut down on through traffic a decent amount. It would potentially move it to other areas like say Osmondson and Schumann, but those are also larger streets in general.
Is there anything we can do as a neighborhood? Because we do have a group that we can kind of quickly disseminate information to. But is there anything we can do as a neighborhood to help with this other than just yelling at cars that are speeding?
Because that happens.
Well, I think a couple of things. So obviously this is a growing neighborhood, number one, right? It's not really an established neighborhood. So from my experience in dealing with neighborhood traffic concerns in general, I hear a lot of complaints about speeding in just in general. So I'm gonna isolate the volume and talk about the speeding. So I hear a lot of folks say things like, and I'm not going to dispute your acumen here as it relates to judging vehicle speeds, but a lot of times I'll hear folks say cars are going 40 miles an hour. And I will literally go and stand out there with a laser and stand next to them after they say that car's going 40 miles an hour and it's going 32. And so the question that I ask the folks in the neighborhood is, at what point would you expect to be pulled over in this violation of the speed limit, right? So I don't want folks to start thinking that this is a speeding car, we're going to take things into our own hands, right? This is a special circumstance because you have a combination of volume and speed. I mentioned earlier there's a certain extent where volume actually slows down cars, just because you don't have the potential to speed, you have the lag time. What happens when you start installing speed limit or stop signs is you increase the lag times, which increases the catch-up speeds. So you'll have two cars that are traveling, and one car is going 25 miles an hour, both come to a stop sign. That car then goes, the car behind it now has more space, so now they increase and they accelerate and they go faster. So a lot of times folks want to have a stop sign here or at an intersection and think that that's going to slow down cars. It does temporarily, but then you have that catch-up speed. So I think the way to really address this is for the neighborhood to communicate and for everyone to understand, if we're going to make changes, why those changes are being made. Because we have a very small representation of the neighborhood here. Now we go and make changes, now you get 5 more people in here and they're going to say, well, why'd you do it this way? It should have been done this way, right? So I think whatever changes are made, it's helpful to communicate that out as to why that's being done and the intent behind it, right? Because all of us could sit here, just like I could take the 6 detectives that I supervise and give them a case, and they're going to have 6 different approaches to that situation, right? So I think it's coming up with a plan, realizing that we may have to tweak it as we go along, and that it's going to have impacts in some fashion or another. The bottom line is that no matter where signs go, just like people were driving through that intersection, if anyone remembers Fitchburg Road when it used to flood a lot, you would literally have road closed, the roads flooded signs, and there's 6 feet of water, and people would move the barricade to then drive through the water. So my point being is that sometimes signage then creates false expectations of people who are expecting that a car is going to avoid that area or stop at a stop sign. And I think really communication becomes a key part. So I think Ross is, maybe we have some ideas in mind as to some modifications we can make that then, to answer your question, helping push that message out would be helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, Bill.
Yeah, so just along the same lines that everybody's kind of getting at here is we want to make it as inconvenient as possible for cars to get through there. So I don't know if the city has orange barrels in place at each intersection, some of those temporary speed bumps, those black and yellow stripe things. You can just put a whole bunch of those out there so that it's impossible to go through at a high rate of speed without, feeling very uncomfortable or damaging your car.
And one thing with speed bumps, as Ned said, they do sometimes increase the catch-up speed and the gaps between the cars. So it's definitely something we can look at and see if we have good places for that.
Specifically with the speed bumps, where the kids are going to cross the road would be ideal for those, so that before they get a chance to accelerate, they've slowed down there at their slowest when the kids are crossing.
There actually is a built-in speed bump on Seminole.
Yeah, there's a raised
4-foot crossing.
They still fly over it though.
So, I mean, they do fly over. I've seen that, but I don't think a small black one is going to do anything more than what a 4 feet built-in concrete speed hump is. And there's also a fair amount of construction traffic that's actually intended to be there, and I question whether that may cause additional problems of having additional speed bumps. I don't know. I know the supervisors from William Ryan are pretty good from the build perspective, but I think the other part here is, yes, we have a small minority from the Stoner Prairie, but I think there's probably 200 people in our group that we can use. Like, most people are checking a couple times a week, and then we're a pretty friendly neighborhood, so I think we can get the word out pretty quickly for anything that would be helpful.
Yeah, and that the social media and, actual person-to-person education is extremely helpful in almost all cases like this, so.
I don't know if we can have more signs like on McKee, like from like the AMC area down McKee that way, because people are turning on Seminole and don't realize that it's a road closure until they already turn.
Okay.
Because there's not enough signage that way, and so they're like it's taking them a while to get turned around because they don't realize that there's a road closure until they're already on Seminole Highway.
Right.
Turning from McKee.
Yep. Yeah. So you're saying if we had additional signage on McKee in both directions, one difficulty with that's definitely something I will look at. One difficulty with signage of that nature where you're trying to tell motorists about road construction on a separate road is your signs very quickly get too long to read while you're driving. If you're saying Seminole Highway closed in 1 point however many miles.
You can say no Lacy Road access with an arrow.
Yeah.
That's fair, yeah.
Hey, Ned, what's the enforcement issues that you would have? I mean, we're talking about size, so say someone just drives through, and you have a cop right there. What's the enforcement that you can do? Like, what kind of citation?
So you could potentially have a failure to obey sign citation there. The issue is that we would have to essentially watch. So the closest example I was talking to Ross about this is when when Lacy, Fitchburg or Lacy, one of those is under construction. You could literally see from one end of the closure to the other. So you could see someone would come through there and not have a destination within that work zone. That's the true definition of local traffic. And then they come through there and they say, where are you coming from? And sometimes they tell you the truth and sometimes they tell you some other story. So the difficulty here is that you would almost have to get to the extent where you're following someone through there. And on top of it too, the definition, again, when it says no through traffic, I think I would probably have to consult and say, what's our justification for no through traffic here versus the local traffic, which is in the work zone. And again, the work zone is the red area there.
And doesn't include the Stoner Prairie neighborhood for this
Right,
project.
and so when we talk about where are we putting up no through traffic signs, is that in the project area? And I think that's the area where we would have to be careful is why are we limiting through traffic here? I understand, and don't get us wrong, obviously everyone understands the safety issues here. It's being realistic about putting signage up and trying to modify behavior in a positive way, but also doing it in a way that's I think justifiable, and we know that's right, but then being consistent moving forward in the future and following, in the legality of a neighborhood's, has a lot of traffic coming through here and we want to put up a no through traffic sign. Again, the detour is the official detour, but it is not the only way to get around this project, right? This is a complicated area because we're talking miles in between the north and south diversions of this.
Yeah, I only asked that question just trying to manage expectations that when you put up those signs, then people are going to say, well, we want a cop there, and that's why we just wanted Ned to kind of address that.
Yeah. And like I said, thank you for what you've done so far. It's just, I think people are apprehensive, and at least at my house, being kind of one of the central houses of kids coming out and a ball going down outside of a driveway into the road. That's the last thing that I want to see. And so whatever we can do, the small things, and then ultimately I also know there's not a way that we can post up an officer there or for 24/7. But I do think that some of those signs that would be physical barriers would help out in the situation of trying to redirect traffic towards a single choke point that potentially may increase the volume but decrease the speed, which would be kind of one of the benefits. I think the other part that I've always seen, and you probably hear it the most, is people will come through on Lacy and they'll come up and come around the bend to Leo Mary, and you can hear tires squealing.
It's ridiculous, especially at 5 o'clock in the morning when it first starts.
And I'll just say one of my goals and the city's goals, I think, with posting additional signage probably would not be to create one route through Stoner Prairie. It would be to, over the course of a day or two or three, deter cars from coming through at all. Because like we've said, Stoner Prairie is not the official detour anyways. So,
Understood.
yeah.
Also just understanding, you got a bunch of people that are going to work. If they know the route's there, the difference between the physical detour, the signage, you can put what you want on it, but I'm also being realistic. Like, unless it's something physical that you have to either drive around or move, get out and move.
Right, yep.
I understand there are very small limitations that are going to be impacted there, so.
And so I think the key point, and I don't, because I feel like sometimes I will offer a response or will offer a response, and again, to Alder Wheeler's point, it's sometimes about framing expectations and what's within the realm of reality here. And I mean, obviously, if I was living in the neighborhood, I'd want a gate with an access card and, you know, to allow you to enter, right? We're talking a project here that's, you know, obviously going to seem way too long and then going to go through your summer. But, you know, that's best case scenario. You know, we have to kind of balance the legal specifications and a whole host of things. And so I don't want it to come, like, there's certainly a concern here, right? Like, we want people, but I want people to follow traffic safety laws and follow the speed limit everywhere in the city. And I think looking at a couple of tweaks here that we could make, and then understanding that they might not work and additional signage might create more confusion, and now you have cars turning around and doing other things. So I think it might take some time of just spending a little bit more time in that neighborhood. I don't know if your interns are available to watch traffic patterns or anything. Or see.
Yeah, they have the first couple days of it.
So and see after we make those modifications how they're working.
Yep.
And I think, well, at least what I proposed is trying to get the signage and the physical barriers at a point where there is an actual outlet.
An outlet, someplace for them to go.
So as opposed to either before or after, because I think whatever that road is on Lacy,
And that's always our goal with, you know, no through traffic or road closed signage is to, you know, you don't have it right at the closure, so people have to do a U-turn in the middle of the road, which obviously did happen here, even though there is the signage a lot further down the road telling people that the road will be closed. But getting people to believe those signs is something I haven't quite figured out. I think you...
Yeah, so I was just going to ask a question. So my name is Anna Scott, and we're at the corner of Belt and Wayfair. I was going to say a couple comments. One is the installation of the dead-end sign has certainly helped. Very first few days, we were definitely seeing people fly through, get into the dead end, get even more frustrated, and make their speeds go even faster, so the dead-end sign has helped. But the other thing, we've definitely seen more traffic that's traveling north, so the traffic that's coming from Lacy Road, up Wayfair, and then turns left to get kind of back out of the neighborhood. The thing that we see is a lot of times that intersection doesn't have any stop signs, and people tend to take the curve very tight, and so they're not necessarily kind of staying in the lane. I didn't know if there was anything that we could do there to kind of encourage, because there is no stop sign, slowing down and making sure you're staying in your lane so we don't have kind of an accident from that perspective.
that long term may be a place for a stop sign.
Yeah, I don't know what the long term is for that intersection, but
Just because there's a park proposed for Stoner Prairie.
Right.
And they also have the fields there for everything else. So of all the logical, I would like to not have a neighborhood full of stop signs, I agree. But I think from a logical perspective, that may be one of those. But yes, I've seen almost hit your curb.
yes.
And we had considered stop signs on a four-way stop or stop signs on various combinations of legs of that intersection. And one of our concerns was that adding a new temporary stop sign, if drivers aren't used to it, drivers coming one way might expect a driver to stop, and then they don't get that because the driver with the stop sign is not used to having it there, and that will lead to more conflicts. So that was kind of our concern with putting whatever combination of stop signs there. I think yield signs are a possibility there temporarily, and then looking after this road construction finishes with a more complete view of traffic in this neighborhood with the park. Some stop signs might be in the future. I could see that as a possibility. So, but I do think the yield signs have some of the same issues as the stop signs. It's a new thing. It may create more conflicts, I think less so than the stop sign. So, yeah.
Other questions,
Yeah.
thoughts, comments?
I think just having signage to try to make it more difficult to go through the neighborhood would be a start. We don't expect people to get tickets. That's not reasonable to follow someone through the neighborhood. But having something to make it more difficult to go through these entrances would be at least a start. To remind people hey, this actually isn't your detour. This is a neighborhood, to think about that.
And that's one thing that I do bring up in neighborhood traffic safety issues, and even in established neighborhoods, are I think that's one thing you definitely have working against you. Even though it's quite obvious that you're turning into a neighborhood, I think for someone that's not familiar with the area, it still very much comes across as a neighborhood that's under construction, and that it's not fully occupied or even partially occupied, right? You don't have, and obviously this weather isn't helping, but clearly established lawns and parks and lots of things on the street and trees and things that really give it that character of a neighborhood. And that's one of the first steps that I always ask neighborhoods to consider is how can you, I've seen studies where they put up a neighborhood sign, you're now entering this neighborhood. It really delineates this from a main road kind of thing. And so I think that is one of the factors that influences people's decision making as they drive through a neighborhood. The other thing I always, and I will not ever walk away from an opportunity to say this, when people are concerned about neighborhood traffic safety, and I'm not putting this back on you, but do we always drive the same way that we want people driving in our neighborhood when we're driving through other neighborhoods, right? It's a context thing. So that's the message that I plan on delivering to the folks at Promega and Sub-Zero, is that this is a neighborhood. If you do choose to come through here, we suggest you go otherwise. Be considerate of the fact that this is a neighborhood, right? Mm-hmm. And really think about, the impact that you're having. Humanize it a little bit, right? So that's definitely a topic that we're going to revisit, is the messaging to them. Again, if we could get back into influencing large groups of people to get them to do any number of things, I think we'd be having a much different conversation, and probably could afford those gates to go up and down in the neighborhood and that type of thing. So I do agree, is that making this seem more like a neighborhood and reminding folks that this isn't someplace that they should be going through would be helpful.
Yeah. Any other questions, comments?
You have your cards available too, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I have cards with my contact info up here. And I'm available for questions one-on-one afterwards as well. So thank you everyone for coming. Appreciate your attendance.
Thank you.